and welcome to all of you to Second Saturday Conversation. Our overall theme for this year is going home to another way, a slight variation on Matthew's going home by another way. And we can go home by another way, but end up in the same place. So going home to another way suggests that maybe we'll end up in a place a little different than where we expected. And I am assuming that all of us who tune into Second Saturday, that we all have a restlessness for God, even if we're not quite sure what we're talking about, but that we have a stirring, a restlessness for God. And that we're seeking a way to understand and express our experiences sort of beyond the confessional, propositional language of our classical theology. We think that perhaps that's limiting our way of talking about our experience and our wonderment. So we're attempting to set things loose, set things free, welcome the open-ended, even the impossible, and to do so for the love of God, for the love of God. I want to turn this time over to Megan, who is my assistant in all of this. If it weren't for Megan, she's the technical person. I wouldn't be able to do this. So Megan, do you, as a flight attendant, do you want to give us some instructions as we take off today?
Sure thing, Marianne. 1 second here. So, good morning, everyone. I was called out for this last time, but I'm still going to say it. So I have the slightly unsavory portion of the morning. And just as a reminder to please keep yourselves muted throughout the morning, unless you're called upon. If you do have questions or comments during the conversation, please direct them to the chat, which you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen. We want to use that chat space as a place for your comments related to the topic for the day. And we will draw from that chat space for our plenary session later this morning. If you do want to be called upon, you can also indicate that in the chat, please. Before the plenary, we will give you a few minutes to write there. The plenary will begin at the end of this presentation or our conversation this morning. And Jeff Cresswell will be our moderator, depending on some technical things this morning, or I will also be our moderator. This will be a time to reflect on the thoughts and ideas shared by Marianne and John Caputo this morning. If you would like to personally connect with Marianne or John later today, we are offering a coffee time from 11:05 to 11:15 or 11:20 after the presentation and the plenary. Again, if you have any questions during the conversation, please direct them to the chat. Keep yourselves muted unless you're called upon.
I know what the problem is.
And then Jeff Cress. So if you can keep yourselves muted, everyone, during the presentation today, that would be great. So thanks so much for your time and space, and enjoy the
Megan,
moment.
I have a question. I can type things into my chat. I can't find a way of sending it. So would somebody ask John Caputo how his message is different from process theology for me? Because I can't send it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anita, you should just be able to press enter, but I'll make a note of that and we'll ask it later.
I don't have an enter. I think there's a misfunction in my computer.
Thanks, Anita. Okay. And I'm sure that Jack has heard this as you speak. So he'll make note of that, I'm sure. Anyway, thank you. And thanks, Megan. I want to, by the way, Jeff Creswell is coming in from Mexico today. So Jeff, are you with us? Let me just check right out in the beginning.
I am here, Marianne.
Oh, lovely.
All is well so far.
Okay, excellent. Apparently they lost Wi-Fi earlier this morning, so I'm delighted that you're here. And we'll see you in a little bit later. I want to start today with a few quotes, brief quotes, to sort of set a tone for this morning. The first quote is sort of our signature for this year. And it's a quote from Van Morrison from his song, When Heart is Open, which we just heard. Many of you know that Mark and I courted to Van Morrison. So Van Morrison has a dear place in my heart, and this song in particular. So our signature quote, when heart is open, you will change, just like a flower slowly opening. Sort of like the rose that blossoms because it blossoms. When heart is open, you will change. And from the prophet Isaiah, you know, we fuss about how we might do liturgy now, how we pray, how to worship. But these few words from the prophet Amos underscores for us what is God's passion, what really matters to God. From the 5th chapter of Amos. I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Take away from me the noise of your songs, but let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. I despise your festivals. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Psalm 42, it's a lament. We long for God with sighs and tears too deep for words, and yet we wonder, where is my God? As a deer longs for flowing streams, so my soul longs for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When shall I come and behold the face of God? My tears have been my food day and night, while people say to me continually, where is your God? Where is your God? And finally, from Augustine, or Augustine. This was his question, and I suggest that it should be ours, asked again and again and again. What do I love when I say, I love my God? What do I love when I say, I love my God? Today, we are honored. I am honored to welcome Jack Caputo to be with us. And I'll introduce him in a moment. But I want to say a little bit about Jack's influence and effect on me. I didn't read Jack Caputo until after Marcus died. Marcus died in 2015. And I haven't read all of Jack's work, but I've read enough that I have changed, just like a flower slowly opening. Mark's perspective and work, I think, is very consistent with Jack's, but Mark uses very different language than Jack. Jack has different training than Mark. Jack has been very influenced by continental philosophy and the French deconstructionists, and Marcus did not spend much time with that. So I think that they are they perceive in the same way, but they talk about it a little differently. Mark's death had just a profound effect on me. It was just a deep personal loss. It's also a public loss, but it was a deep, deep personal loss. And I experienced a grief that I'd never experienced before. And it's the hardest thing I've gone through. And I've mentioned that to you before. But, and nothing prepared me for the grief experience that I had after Mark died. And after Mark's death, something started to shift, but shifted in me. And I can't fully explain it. In many ways, it's still going on. But Mark's death called the question on a lot of things for me about mortality and eternity and what we believe and why and what is our hope. And yet through this grief process that I've been through, I've actually come through it with more existential trust, a deeper existential trust than ever. And I want to say Jack's work has contributed deeply to that. Jack's work, if you will, kind of, it midwifed me out of my own tomb into something else. Next to Marcus and Marcus's influence on my understanding of our tradition and of scripture and so forth, next to Mark, Jack Caputo of late has been my most significant influence. And I know he will continue to be for quite some time. I have not fully inwardly digested his work. And I want to say that his work also has humor. He has, to my ear, a poetical way of talking about things. He's clever. Some of his writing for me has a little bit of a wink and a nod. And I love it, at least the parts that I understand or think I understand. And two things I want to mention that Jack has said that really caught me and were a tremendous relief, okay? One is that he suggests that we really don't know who we are. We really don't know. And the other is that he suggests we're all blind. And that's not an infirmity, okay? Don't misunderstand that. But we really don't know. We can only see so much, and we really can't see what's coming. And so we really don't know who we are, and we're all blind. And I kind of cried with tears of relief and laughter when I read that. And I thought, I mean, I don't have to work so hard. So I want to thank Jack for how he has helped me to think, rethink, imagine, and hope. And I am just really honored to have him here with us today. So for those of you who have been with us for this last year, I have drawn deeply from Jack's work. We have explored, I've introduced weak theology, radical theology, a non-sovereign God, okay? So out with supernatural theism, and but opening up to something else. We've talked about event, writ large and small, event as a summons, as a call, as a stirring, as the category under which God falls. And so I'd love to hear Jack talk a little bit more about event today, because I think it's really important. We talked a bit about theopoetics, a style of language that is really required as we talk about a new way of talking, a different way of talking about God that's not confined to propositional and confessional terms. Last time we talked about a mortal God, which some people thought was just an oxymoron. How can that be? But a mortal God, it's an interesting, provocative thought. And throughout all of this is the art of hermeneutics, which is the art of interpretation. And we interpret, everything is interpreted. As Jack would say, it's interpretation all the way down. Now, that does not mean that just anything goes, not by a long shot. As he might say, some stories are better than others. Okay. But because so what we do is an interpretation, it really matters what we how we interpret and why. So I'm hoping that in this time that we have this morning, that we'll be able to explore some of these things together. I'll ask Jack about that. And then I want you all to know that during our plenary time, you'll have an opportunity to ask Jack some questions as well. And I'm looking forward to that. But I want to start by asking Jack a little bit about his own journey. And by the way, his book, Hope Against Hope, is a wonderful open door to better understanding of what has shaped him. So I highly recommend that. Hello, Jack. But I am inviting Jack to reflect a little bit more about his inscape today and what has stirred him, maybe what continues to haunt him. I am assuming that Jack still has a restless heart. And I sense that Jack is, I mean, like us, a lover of God and has a restless heart. And so, Jack, I would love to hear from you a little bit about how you got here. I mean, if I may, you're 80, you've done a whole life, this is your life work. Here you are, I dare say, a man of hope and prayer. So tell us a little bit about how you got here and maybe what you want us to know about you that might encourage us. So let me welcome Jack Caputo to our conversation. I'm happy to see you.
Well, thank you very much, Marianne. I'm very, very touched and moved by what you were just saying.
Yes, you've been my mentor.
I mean, this is just, somebody says, for some philosophers will occasionally say to me, why are you talking about God? Why don't you just talk about being? Or, you don't need to talk about God to get all this said. Why did you choose God? And I said, well, I didn't choose God. It chose me. God chose me. I never had much say in the matter. God was up and running in the world that I came into when I arrived, and I was spoken for, by my godparents. And I mean, I was just born in the way that evangelicals are born into this evangelical world and the Bible. Well, I was born into Roman Catholicism and the church. And so my first aspiration was to become a priest. And then when I went to high school, I was taught by the De La Salle brothers. And I just was swept away by them and by one brother in particular, a man named Brother Paul. And that
became your name too, did it not?
When I entered, I took the name Paul, and our second son is named Paul. And yeah, and so that became the model for me of what I wanted to do with my life, not to be a priest, because I could see in high school that actually what I wanted to do was be a teacher. I didn't want to be professionally concerned with the administration of the sacraments. I wanted to be a teacher and a member of a religious order with vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, so that I could fulfill my religious aspiration and be a teacher too. And
you were young when you made this decision. Yes,
like when I graduated high school, I went from high school into a medieval novitiate, which was really medieval. I mean, it was silence all day long, and if you wanted to speak, you had to give a signal that you wanted to speak. Signal was "Live Jesus in our hearts," and then the other person would say "Forever," and you would say, "Your pants are on fire," or "We got to get out of here." I mean, whatever you wanted to say. And then at nighttime, it was the great silence. So you know, we were being prepared for the 13th century, I think. And
How
so
helpful was that?
well, in the long run, it turned out to be very helpful because, I mean, I really did spend 15 months in a monastic world, completely monastic world. Turned out to be a mistake. The Christian Brothers were making they were called the De La Salle Brothers, the Christian Brothers, not the Irish Christian Brothers who are involved in all this sexual abuse stuff, child abuse stuff. But these are French De La Salle Brothers. They were preparing us. They really were preparing us for a different kind of life. They weren't preparing us to teach in the 20th century American high school. In that division, they later on figured that out after Vatican II. But it was turned out to be a killing experience. It's just I thought I was going to die. I mean, I remember wishing at one point that I would die because then I wouldn't abandon my vocation. I would be faithful to my vocation, and I would go to heaven. But it was that tough. I mean, it was really, really rigorous, old time, pre-Vatican II Catholic monastic life. And at the time, it was like going into the army and going into boot camp. At the time, I just thought it was punishment. You know, I thought I was being hazed to see if I could survive. But by the time it was over, and by the time I went on to college, which was the next step, I had been sort of suffused or perfused with this profoundly meditative life that never, ever, ever left me.
Oh.
And it was a life of prayer and silence and study and labor. It was literal labor. I mean, because it was a farm, we had to work a farm. And never left me. And then what happened was I went to the boss, you know, the brother provincial, and I said, look, I don't want to teach high school. I have in the meantime discovered philosophy. I want to teach philosophy. And I want you to send me to get a PhD in philosophy, and I'm going to teach at LaSalle University in Philadelphia. That's what I want to do. And he said, well, you see, in this order, you don't get to say what you want to do. Or in any Catholic, you took this vow called obedience. So you want to do what God wants you to do, which is expressed for you in the will of your superiors. Never forget that one. And there was a good answer to that I just didn't think of at the time, and that is,
and what was that?
why isn't what God wants me to do expressed by Him, by God, in my natural inclination and my natural gifts, and you know what I want to do? Why isn't that an expression of God's will? I didn't think of that at the time. I should have. What I should have told him was, and so I left and I went on to get my PhD in philosophy because I wanted to work in philosophy because I thought philosophy. I mean, I never lost my love for theology, and I had a sort of a debate with myself about philosophy and theology. But I thought, in philosophy, you ask questions, and the cardinal archbishop can't get you. You know, he's not looking over your shoulder, not monitoring you. You don't have to worry about papal encyclicals. You don't have to worry about the authority of the church. You can just ask questions. And then I discovered. And I had been, you know, Catholic education is, you get immersed in philosophy. I mean, when you, particularly in those days, priests were deeply, carefully trained in philosophy. So understanding theology for me meant understanding philosophy first. You had to get that, you know, I got into Thomas Aquinas in a really big way. I mean, I at one point wanted to be a Thomistic scholar. I wanted to study medieval philosophy, and that was the whole thing. And then I discovered contemporary continental philosophy and Heidegger and hermeneutics and then eventually deconstruction. But all along, all that stuff, well, everything I was learning as a philosopher was ultimately in the service of this theological orientation that I had had since I was a little boy, when I was an altar boy, and I thought I wanted to be a priest. And then I thought I wanted to be a Christian brother. The whole time, you know, theology was sort of like that, you know, waiting for me to come back. You know, when I went into philosophy, theology was waiting for me to just show up again, because that's really where. So what I ended up doing was the thinking about theology and religion and God philosophically. And then I realized, well, you know, you can't, philosophers can be a little bit ham-fisted about theology and religion. You know, they tend to look at it in terms of logical arguments. You
Right, good, like,
and now there's something to that. I mean, you need not to be saying illogical things and crazy things, but it won't get you there, because you've got to be inside of it. You got to resonate with it. You got to move in unison with the rhythms of religion and theology, or you won't get it. And that's hermeneutics and phenomenology. Hermeneutic phenomenology is, instead of writing propositions and making arguments about something, speaking from out of the experience of the thing itself. Heidegger speaks of aus der Erfahrung, out of the very experience of something. And you don't write about it, you write from it.
uh-huh.
So that's where I finally ultimately settled. And so you'll see, you were saying I have a certain poetic style when I write. Now that was a little bit of a problem with the philosophers. You know, when I would write books for university presses, which were documented, careful, scholarly, refereed, you know, stuff. Well, that's very serious. I don't mean to make like it light. I was also writing with a certain poetic style that they were not, that the Academy was never comfortable with.
I believe it.
And I said, well, you know, I don't think you can talk about this without distorting it.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't do that, you got to speak the language. You got to walk the walk and talk the talk if you want to get inside this stuff. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I ended up doing. I ended up trying to reach an understanding of religion without the authority of the cardinal archbishop in the church. See, I had the same problem that evangelicals have with twisting free from the authoritarianism of the Bible. Catholics have that with the church. It's the same thing. When I listen to what evangelicals tell me, they're trying to recover from it. I understand that, because I had exactly the same experience with the church.
Okay.
So I had a lover's quarrel with the church, and I ended up where I ended up because I just started thinking about theology and religion from within, but without intimidation, without the intimidation of religious authority and what you were calling supernaturalism.
Right. Or the shaming, if I may say that. Or the shaming. The shaming. I think very often
yes.
Christianity in its requirements, there's a shaming aspect to it. And so I mean, it's is that unfair to say?
No. I think that's exactly right. I mean, you feel guilty. You feel like there's something wrong with you. It's like you know, when you listen sometimes to people who came out, you know, as homosexuals, and they talk about how they felt like there was something wrong with them. Right. Well, I think the church can do that to you. You know, religion can do that to you. Same, it is. It's similar.
Yeah.
So, no, if you don't stop me, I'll just keep talking. So.
Well, I don't want to stop you, but I do want to encourage you. Let me ask you though, just when you said that prayerful part of yourself, the part that the contemplative, the prayerful, that sense of something sort of luring you, calling you, that apprehension that you had, that was with you when you were a little guy, Jackie, right? Looking into the deep, dark night sky. And that has, if I've heard you correctly, that has not left you.
Yeah. No, that goes, call the Undertaker. I'm gone. If I lose that, I'm gone. It's over. Now that's I mean, I am profoundly grateful to the time I spent in the Christian Brothers. It was only 4 years, but it really I came home to myself. I discovered what I was up to. And when I left, brothers, I said, thank you. I have discovered my vocation. I really do know my vocation now. I thought it was. And it's always been the same vocation, but it's always, and which is the very word vocation, right? Means vocare, call.
Mhm.
It's always been the same call.
Okay. And how would you name that? That
Now, I mean, I have philosophical vocabulary, but
Right.
I think a philosophical vocabulary that does not do violence to religion. I think most philosophy of religion
Mm.
does violence to religion because it turns it into concepts, propositions, and arguments.
Uh,
That's what philosophers do. That when you get your PhD, they give you a bag, like a doctor's bag, and inside are concepts, propositions, and arguments. That's how you make your living. Now, that's not wrong, but it won't get you to where you go. You need to have a phenomenological hermeneutical sensitivity to it. The classical definition of hermeneutics, by the way,
Mhm.
goes back to the Lutheran Reformation, when the Reformation masters were still writing in Latin. And the first hermeneutics course was a course in biblical hermeneutics. And because Luther had opened up the study of the Bible, well, then everybody started arguing about what the Bible meant. And so you see the first courses about hermeneutics were biblical hermeneutics, and they were in Latin. So one of the first definitions of hermeneutics was from a man named Rambach, and he defined it as the subtilitas intelligendi and the subtilitas explicanti, the subtlety of understanding,
Okay.
and the subtlety of explicating.
Okay. And just say that for us again. Say it again. The subtlety of understanding.
Subtlety of understanding and the subtlety of explicating or interpreting, explicandi.
Is it,
Literally, the
can
word,
I liken that to the fragrance of a rose?
sure. It's the fragilitas part is don't manhandle this thing. Don't be ham-fisted. You have to be very gentle with this thing so that it can talk to you,
Mm.
so that you can hear what's going on there, and you don't bring your own presuppositions to it. You let it go to the thing prepared to be instructed by it. And so leave your bag of concepts, propositions, and arguments at home, and be prepared to be instructed.
Wow.
And so that's so at the end of it, you become articulate about. I mean, you're trying to become articulate about what you're talking about. So now to get back to your question, now when I talk about it, I have the language of hermeneutics, phenomenology, deconstruction. Husserl, Heidegger, Derrida. The theologian who matters the most to me, the one who makes the most sense, is making a kind of a comeback. He was a hero of our youth, but he's making a comeback now, is Tillich. Tillich is all these young people are rediscovering Tillich because they're discovering that he's got this postmodern side. So now I've got that kind of language. And I found that the most felicitous way that does the least violence to religion and theology and God is to speak in terms of the event.
Of event.
Event. I think that's the most. I mean, there is a lot of different ways you can go about it, but the one that makes the most sense to me, that I think is the richest, the most has the lightest touch, subtilitas, light touch. You need a light touch when you talk about art. You need a light touch when you talk about religion. You can't go banging it with a hammer. To get it open, you gotta listen.
So talk to us a little bit about event. What is event? What do you?
Okay. First of all,
Sense this is really key in understanding even how we experience God. So say a little bit more to us about event.
It's the whole ball game in terms of my approach, in terms of what I do. It's the whole ball game. It's a word. First of all, it's a word that comes from Latin. It's Derrida's word. Well, that's not true either. Most of the major cognitive philosophers are using it, but we have it from the Latin and the French. Venir, to come out from, okay? The outcoming, or the breaking out, you know, the incoming, the adventing. One time someone said to me, what's the most important liturgical season for you? And I said, Advent, because it's the time of the turn towards the coming of God's coming. Okay. So it's literally, the word event means outcoming, outbreaking. You can also incoming, breaking in, breaking out, breaking in, depending on where you're standing, of whatever.
Okay. Right.
I mean, it's a word that settles into a vocabulary and disturbs the vocabulary. It makes the vocabulary restless. So when you and it could be any vocabulary.
Does it suggest that things break into our lives or come or break forth or lure us that we didn't create? Maybe we can recognize them or respond to them, but that there's something that happens.
There's something going on in those words, so that those words, in any order, in art, in politics, in science, in philosophy, in theology, whatever order you talk about, there's something going on in those words.
Okay, there's
prevents that word from being identical with itself. Okay. So that the word resonates with memory and recall, and resonates with expectation and hope. It's never itself. It's never self-identical. So when you talk about, take something, democracy. Okay. Democracy is a word that echoes from the ages, right? It goes back to the Greeks. And when the Greeks started talking like that, something was echoing in their ear that goes back to time immemorial that we don't even know about. And it came to words for them, and it worked its way through the ages, and it got into our head, and it contains a promise. So you say, this is a democracy. Well, nobody believes
possibility.
That. It's that's right. It's a stir with possibility. It's a stir with memory. So it's never present. Its presence is interrupted by absence, by recall. The call is interrupted or is constituted, not interrupted. Call is constituted by what it is constantly recalling, but has fallen out of mind, and what it's calling for, which we haven't gotten to yet. Okay. So
this suggests that there's a dynamic, an unfolding, that democracy, we may never fully get it, but that it continues to, if you will, call us, or that it's a notion that we have a resonance, so that it's not nothing, but that you can't, but you can't make it static.
Because we're in time. It's the major work that Heidegger wrote was called Being in Time. And Heidegger's major complaint with philosophy up to that point was that it kept thinking of being as timeless. True being is timeless. And if it moves, there's something wrong with it. Heidegger says, no, that's not the way it is. The very meaning of being is time. It's process, it's movement. That's why the person who said, what's the difference in process philosophy? Well, there's an answer to that. It's a long answer, but I would say process theology or process philosophy is a kissing cousin of what I'm doing. It's not quite the same thing, but it's a kissing cousin of it, because it's got the same notion that being is process, being is movement, being is dynamic. And so that means it's constituted both by memory and expectation. Now, so what's the event? The event is that dynamic that movement, that restlessness that is at work in things that look like on the surface they're stable and present, right? So when you talk about the deconstruction of presence, everybody goes, "Oh my God, he's a nihilist." No. Relax. What we're talking about to deconstruct something. If somebody deconstructs you, you just say thank you very much. I mean, to deconstruct something is to open it up,
Right.
to release it, to expose it, to
Call the
expose
question
it to
on it.
all the.
To push its own integrity. Deconstruction. You call the question on
It pursues what it really is after, what it's got, what it seeks. Yeah, its own integrity. So so to deconstruct something is to expose it to all that it should be recalling but has forgotten, and all that it should be expecting and hopes for. So it's an openness to the coming of what we can't see coming.
Okay.
It's an exposure to the memory of something that goes back to time immemorial.
Okay.
And
Is there another word you can use to describe what that is that you're, I mean, an event?
That's why I said it would occur in any different order. In any given order, this process is at work. It would be at work in poetry, in the poem to come. Every poet is trying to write the poem to come, without forgetting the tradition of poetry from which they emerge. They're trying to indent. Venire, same word, indent. They're trying to open something to its impossible future. You know, they want to do something new. It can't be absolutely new, but it must expose itself to the to come. So that there's the poem to come. In religion, particularly Christianity, it's the kingdom to come. We're dreaming of the kingdom to come. The very meaning of the kingdom is the to come. It's the to come of the kingdom of the to come.
So if I'm sort of, to borrow your language, is it sort of what may seem impossible, like the kingdom of God here, may seem impossible, but we make it possible?
Well, we're expected to. Yeah, see that what you just said there, I think is probably the best, from my point of view, the best way to think about God.
Okay.
With God, all things are possible.
Okay.
So God is the point of convergence of the possibility of all possibilities, the possibility of the impossible. Now, at this point, my philosopher friends are rending their garments. Stop! You can't talk about something that's impossible. That's nonsense. Well, logically speaking,
It's rending our garments at this point too, but keep going.
I mean, a true logical impossibility, saying something contradictory, that would, you actually, you don't want to do that. I don't recommend that. But the impossible here means what you would call what a philosopher would call the phenomenological impossibility. That is to say, not a square circle, but an experiential impossibility where something shatters our horizon of expectation.
Okay.
I think that's the best way to put it. Shatters our horizon of expectation. Transform, makes all things new. See, the New Testament and the biblical, the prophets and the New Testament are filled with language like that.
Okay. And so
all over.
So how does that relate to hope? And if I may, to love?
Well, you could articulate everything I just said in those terms. And you go back, forget the word event, and just use the word hope. And you could say it's the structure of hope, but it's not hope. It's not the hope you have when your stock investor says, I really think plastics, are the future.
Right.
I really think lithium, where they're going to, all the solar panels are going to be made out of lithium. Lithium is the future. I think if you put 10,000 into lithium, there's good reason to hope you're going to make some money.
That's the economy idea, right?
That's
the
yeah,
strategy that goes
that's
into it, right? And that's not what we're
I
talking
mean. That's not what I mean.
Right.
Hope gets to be hope when it comes into contact with the impossible. When so you hope in the possible, but then it's a relatively reasonable expectation. But hope gets to be hope when it doesn't look so good.
Okay.
You know, when it's not a reasonable expectation. And then something has to drive you, which is what? It's this, well, then now we can use the word love. It's our love for what is at stake here. The
Okay.
future of democracy, the future of art, the future of
Humanity, the planet.
humanity with the planet. And I think that if you think of being in terms of time, the way Heidegger worked it out, that hope is just sort of built into us.
Okay.
And if you ever extinguished hope, you would, that's, call the Undertaker. I mean, then that's the sickness unto death, right?
So as part of our deep structure about this thing called hope that
I think it's the very structure, it's built into us in virtue of the very structure of time itself.
Huh.
Our very exposure to the future
Okay.
is exposure to the possibility of, is exposure to the possible. And what is always staring within our turn towards the possible is the possibility of the impossible, of what eye hath not seen or ear heard, the thing that shatters our horizon of expectation, the hope against hope, the hope beyond hope, like that. And I think that's when you're in religion. See, when you shift into that gear, when you're out of the gear of the economy and the reasonable expectation,
Right.
and you're into this sort of deep structure of deep expectation, deep valuation, deep meaning. Then you talk about religion, even if you never talk about God, but an artist feels that way about the work of art.
You think this is a deep part of human, this is part of what being a human being is about?
I do.
Okay.
I would say that's who we are.
Even though
I don't think
we are, that's who we are.
I think it's maximally clear in religion, I think, actually. But it's a structure that applies everywhere. So because you're making kind of like Tillich likes to put it, he'll say, when we start talking like this, we are making contact with the unconditional. What's of unconditional import? And that can happen in art, it can happen in science, it can happen in religion. It happens in religion. Religion is sort of like the easiest place to start looking for it, because that religion sort of talks about it all the time.
Religion in the best sense of the word.
Yes. Don't get me started. Right. What has become a religion now, and whether this word is worth its weight?
Right. Let me ask you, because this is something you hinted at early on, and I want to make sure I catch this. Prayer. Okay. We're out with the supernatural theistic notion of God, right? And so when we pray, talk a little bit about prayer, your understanding of prayer. How do we pray? How do we know that we're heard, if that's what we long for, or that we're responded to? Unpack prayer in a postmodern sense. So tell me about your prayer life.
Yeah, here you got to tell, make a distinction between prayer and its sort of classical Orthodox denominational sense,
okay,
with this other prayer on the level of event. And I think prayer in the deep sense, I mean, when you say we are beings of hope, beings of time, I think you're also saying we are beings of prayer. Right? We are.
Okay, I agree.
Prayer is memorialization. It tries to remember something sacred, and it is expectation. It's hope. So if you're not praying, you're not talking about religion, or you're not talking about anything deeply human. I think. I think that, I think prayer goes to the very heart of the event, of the hope and expectation for what's to come. It's petitionary prayer is sort of the least of it. It's sort of the most narcissistic kind of prayer. But it's not. You don't want to. There are levels of narcissism. There's terrible narcissism, but then there's a kind of open-ended, hospitable narcissism where
I love hospitable narcissism.
yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't love yourself, you won't love anything. When you stop loving yourself, then you don't care. Nothing matters, and that means nobody else matters. So you don't want to simply extinguish narcissism, but you want to deconstruct it. You want to keep it open. So petitionary prayer is not bad, but it's not. I think the deepest stage of prayer. I think the deepest stage of prayer is a kind of meditative prayer that quiet, wordless. Prayer is paying attention. Prayer is quiet, listen, and it understands our mortality. There's a French Catholic phenomenologist, theologian named Jean-François. Anyway, he speaks of prayer as a wounded word.
Wow.
A wounded word. We send up wounded words. We sigh. And you said, does anyone hear them? Don't know. Who knows? If we do not know who we are, we do not know in any deep sense what is what's going on. And prayers are the sighs of this being of hope and expectation and memory and love. It's our resonating. Tillich would say it's the way we resonate with the ground of being. It's the way we resonate with the unconditional. When we've made contact with the unconditional, when we've exposed ourselves to it,
and you think
entered into a state of prayer.
In our human beingness, in our humanness, that it can be cultivated. But do you suggest that? I mean, we all have it. That we all respond.
Yeah, unless you've really been badly treated by the world, that it's been knocked out of you, and you're just born into destitution and poverty and crime, and nobody ever gave you a chance. I mean, maybe it would get knocked out of you. Okay. People's lives can be so brutalized, and they're born into brutal circumstances. It could get knocked out of you, but you were talking about at the beginning. The theme is coming home. Well, when you come home, when you come back to yourself, if you can somehow master or surmount the brutality of life and have a moment. I think prayer is a very deep structure. Now all that sounds very edifying, but there's a non-edifying part of it, and that is, I don't think God is a being who exists somewhere. Right? I think that there's something going on in a deep way with the name of God. Okay. Something's getting said there that is very, very important. Okay. And so long as you don't mystify it and mythologize it and supernaturalize it and turn it into some form of magic. Right. Something's important there. Now, it's for us. I don't think this is true for everybody, but it is for us Westerners and the children of the religions of the book. For us, it's almost impossible not to personify God. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. I'm not saying that's false. I'm just saying it's not the whole truth. It's not. You haven't gotten to radical theology until you see that personification is that. It's a personification.
Okay.
But we personify all the time, and we do it with very important, we personify, I think, on some of our most sacred occasions. You know, when you personify a plant that you love, or the tree outside the window, or an old hat that belongs to your old Uncle Harry, who was the joy of your childhood, now long dead, and you inadvertently one day up in the attic come across his hat, and you start talking to it, right? Well, I think something like that is going on when we personify God. And in the scriptures, I think what they're doing is like a dramatist writing a dialogue in a play or a novel. They're personifying God. I mean, it's impossible to think about the unconditional. The Tillich says this. It's impossible to think about the unconditional without thinking about it as a thing. You know, the unconditional means something. Where is it? Well, it is not a thing. It's the ground or the medium or the atmosphere in which things exist. But it's not a thing, not another being. It's being itself, not another being, is the way he puts it. Heidegger puts it that way too. But if you're going to talk about it, you're going to talk about it as if it's a thing. Until he says, that's okay, so long as you know you're doing that. Okay. Right? So he calls that a symbol.
Okay.
Talk about God as a person. That's symbolic language.
Okay.
And he says there are two things to remember about a symbol. First thing is, if you know what a symbol is, you will never say it's only a symbol. People kill one another over symbols, right?
Right.
The second thing is, never confuse the symbol with what it's a symbol of.
Right.
So praying to God as someone, that is it's wonderful. It's a way to give this thing, to give the this deep structure skin and bones, you know, give it flesh, and make it concretize it, and actualize it, realize it. So it's not a. See, Feuerbach was half right. You know, Feuerbach, famous theologian, who said theology is anthropology. We just project all these things onto this alien being called God. I said, well, that's actually half right. You know, we do project, we do anthropomorphize, we do personify, we do all these imaginative things. We say God is a rock, or we say God is a mighty mountain. We say all these things. That's true. We do that. But the only reason we're doing it is we have been taken over by something. We have been seized by something. So all of that projection that Feuerbach identifies is a response to something that's always already got us.
Okay.
Tillich says we've been seized by something of unconditional import. So our projections is a way to try to give it words and image and figure. We tell stories about it. We sing songs about it. We dance to it. We celebrate it. We curse it. We argue with it.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's okay. And something's happening there. What's happening? The event.
Okay. Yeah. And it sounds like you were seized by the event from the time you were a little boy.
I never had a chance. You know, they never gave me a chance. I mean, I grew up in this household, pictures of Jesus and Blessed Virgin and priests and nuns and God and rosary beads, and we were immersed in it. And I never had a chance.
But interestingly, though, beyond all of the, well, let's consider that those are pointers, symbols too, but that beyond all of that, there was something
going on. Something was going on.
From a lot of that. Some of you walked away from a lot of the accoutrement to find out what's behind that. And if I'm understanding you right, you're suggesting there is something behind all of this, even though we can't capture it or even fully know it, or
it is constituted by the fact that we can't capture it. That's
Okay.
what you mean by the unconditional. We can't subject it to conditions.
And my sense is in from you is that because on some level there is a deep down, if you will, from Hopkins, a deep down goodness of things, okay, that whatever this is, I mean, it may surprise us, it may not always be easy, but that this, whatever this is that we live in, it's worthy of our not only attention, but our, can I say, of our love?
Yeah. Yeah. When you say now, yes, absolutely, I agree with everything you just said. Let me just say, add one thing here, though. We need to risk or avoid the risk of being too edifying. So
Edifying? Okay.
we don't want to be too edifying. You know, watch out for edification because it'll get you in trouble. When we talk about a deep, dark ground, which is what we think, right? I mean, that's the ground of being is in German, Tillich would say the Grund is also an Abgrund, this, because we can't get it. You know? It got there before we did. You know, is the guy, Tillich's own master, the guy that Tillich got some of his best lines from was a German philosopher named Schelling. And Schelling said something really quite remarkable. He said his solution to the problem of evil was shocking to the Orthodox because he says, oh, the reason we're evil is that there's a dark principle in being and there's a darkness in God. And when God, he said, there is God in us, Schelling said, is that in God, he floods the dark principle with light. So God keeps that dark principle under lock and key. But when God creates, all hell, literally, all hell breaks loose. The dark principle is set loose. So Tillich said, or Schelling said, well, you know, the darkness is it's God's fault. When God created, he unleashed the darkness. So the darkness could just as well be evil, right? Darkness is a good image for the mysterium tremendum et passionans, but it's also a good image for evil. So the Joseph Conrad writes this book, The Heart of Darkness. So that's the same grunt of being, that's the same ground. So when you open yourself to the unconditional, when you open yourself to the unforeseeable, when you expose yourself to the ground, you're asking for trouble. You're putting things at risk.
We don't know what's coming.
We don't know what's coming. When you pray for the coming of what you can't see coming, it's getting risky. So you don't want to. I like to distinguish between an apophatic theology, the theology of the mystery of God. I like to distinguish between an edifying apophatics, where the mystery of God is always this wonderful. You know, we can't understand God. God is wonderful. He's beyond us. It's all it's wonderful. But there's another kind of apophatics where the abyss is an abyss.
Right. Exactly.
So call that one radical apophatics.
Right. And
but otherwise, no, I agree with what you're saying. I just wanted to put in a word.
And you helped me in standing at the abyss of Marcus's death and absence, and he's gone and it's over, and in standing at the abyss of that, instead of that feeling, well, let me put it this way. I did not plummet. And I thought I was plummeting, actually, but I did not plummet. So there is something that even when we look at the harshness, or even, but there, you know, my hope is that we human beings, that we're not going to plummet to the point where we no longer embody and act hope, because then we are done, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that I give folks a chance to pop in here. And gosh, but I do want to ask you this question because a couple of people have asked me about this. What's your prognosis for Christianity in the 21st century? I'm kind of, I haven't given up on it yet, but I'm sort of hoping that there is a Christianity, that Christianity can be for the 21st century. Do you have any brief comment on that? And then I'm going to open it up to other folks.
You know, before the last 4 years, before 2016, I was more sanguine. I mean, I've always been harshly critical of, not of Christianity, but of the church and the ecclesiastical, clerical, institutional forms that it takes. But the figure of the kingdom of God, the figure of Jesus as the poet of this poem called The Kingdom of God. I mean, God help me if I give up on that. I don't. I'm not going to, I hope I never give up on that.
I'm with you.
But Christianity American Christianity now is in free fall.
Yeah.
I think. And the prophetic voice is growing weaker and weaker, and it's reactionary, nationalistic, racist, heterophobic voices growing stronger, and it's just. I said to I stay in touch with the guys I was in the novitiate with. You know, we're some of them are cold-blooded atheists, and they're angry with me for trying to keep some life going in the old religion. And some of them are pious right-wing Catholics, you know, and I have to be careful with them because they're out there protesting abortion and everything. But I emailed one the other day, an old friend of mine the other day. These are the guys I was in boot camp with, right, 60, 70 years ago. And I said, what do you think? Does religion cause more trouble than it's worth? And he says, reluctantly, yes. He said, I think it causes more trouble than it's worth. Now, I'm sorely tempted to say that, but I won't.
Well, actually, you just snuck that in. I love it. I love it. There are so many things that I would love to unpack with you. I'm going to want you to come back and talk with us.
It'd be my pleasure.
Because I also know you have a deep heart for the mystics. And so I would love to hear you talk about that and grace and anyway, there are a myriad things. But let me, I also want to make sure that you and I have time to do a close. So we've only got about 15 minutes for the plenary. And my apologies to the group, but I get enwrapped. So.
Well, I warned you, if you don't interrupt me, I'll keep talking. So.
Right. Well, I like being enwrapped. So let's Megan, let's go to plenary. I usually read some guidelines that are sort of courtesies about listening and talking. I'm going to skip those. Most of the people who've been with me over the year kind of know them, but we will take as many questions as we can in this short period of time. And then we'll look forward to continuing this conversation next year. But Jeff, if you could help us, my hunch is I don't pay attention to the chat, but my hunch is you have been. Are there a couple of things that are maybe coming up again and again hello, Jeff. Hello there in Mexico. Are there a couple of themes that have been coming up, or people mentioning some things that you could highlight or call upon someone who might have a question that is a number of people's questions?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the chat, and I think Jack, you're stirring people, which is always a good thing.
Not me, it's the event doing that.
I would like to call on David Depew.
Oh,
David, would you mind unmuting yourself, and you had a comment you'd like to make?
Yeah, thank you very much for spending time with us, Jack. Really, we all really appreciate it. Just for the record, I was a De La Salle Christian brother for 10 years, so I resonated with what you said.
Were you a brother who?
Brother Donald in the California district.
Brother Donald, very good.
but
Brother
we've actually met.
Brother
We've actually met. We've actually met once or twice.
We met in a bar
Yes.
at a conference hotel.
Yeah, and once in
That's
your
right.
office.
I was trying to think. I saw this
Yeah,
name.
but-
What is it? This is worth something here. Let me
Yeah,
just
so-
say this before David asks this question. Let me just say this. We were at some conference in California, and I went into the hotel conference bar and I started having a drink. And this guy sits down beside me, and we start talking, and we're talking, and we're talking, and we're really on the same channel. You know, we're in the same wavelength, and we just got all this stuff in common. And all of a sudden, we find out we were both Christian brothers.
So I want to testify to this
True
trend.
story.
Well, yeah, thank you for remembering that. The transformative experience, how that set the agenda for your life, I resonate with that. That happened to me. Marianne knows that we're members of the same parish, and in Bend, Oregon. But my question is this: individuals experience transformative events in their own lives, and you know, when it comes out, well, you feel that grace was at work, a concept we didn't talk about today, but could. The question is prompted by your little brush up there against politics toward the end. That is do the events in your own life, personal life, to really grasp what's going on, do you need to understand the big E events that are going on in your own time? And what prompts me to think this is that I read the New Testament as saying yes to that, because I think that the New Testament is a kind of record of an eventual transformation in history that's being recorded in the lives of individuals, and that's fully explored. And I just wondered about that. It's a very pressing question in the Episcopal Church because we are involved in politics, right? And the terms are often quite difficult to understand. But yeah, I just want to know what you had to say about that. Yeah.
Well, certainly, for sure. I mean, we're operating within horizons, and then the largest horizons are the dominant characteristics of the age and the time and the institutions that we belong to. And so, for us, what the New Testament is talking about is a world event, a Weltgeist, as the Germans say. But the only caution I would have is to say, well, that's for us. I mean, there are multiplicities of cultures in which the shaping events, the formative events that give shape and depth to the culture are different. And there are people who just know next to nothing about Christianity, and they're nonetheless for it. They've just got the different form of life. So these large events, these sweeping world historical events, shape different cultures. And I wouldn't want to, I don't want to become Christocentric. If you're Christian, you're Christocentric, but good. You don't want to be Christocentric in any large sense. If I'm getting at what you're getting at, I don't know.
Yeah. Thanks.
Jeff, maybe we better make sure we get some more voices.
Yep.
Great. Anyway, nice that you two reconnected. I love this.
Yeah, that's me. Can't believe it. I've told that story many times, by the way.
I love it. I love it. So David, you're in the circuits. You've been talked about, David.
Apparently.
You've become a story yourself. I love it. Okay, another question, Jeff?
Yeah, Sandy Harlan had a comment about your references to event. Sandy, are you available?
Yeah.
Maybe you could summarize what the question was.
If you could summarize the question, that would be perfect.
Well, I didn't have a question. It was just a comment. You mentioned democracy as the Greeks, and I'm thinking democracy is a concept or a thing. An election or governing itself is the event. So I was kind of making a distinction between things and events. An event is a happening.
Yeah, events. Yeah, that's. I mean, you can have thing. You can have a thing philosophy, or you can have a process philosophy, or an event philosophy. Now, most philosophers nowadays have given up thing philosophy, and they're all talking about processes and events rather than things. But when I say event, I actually am giving it a different twist. I don't simply mean process. I mean a kind of deep structure. I mean a deep structure of memory and expectation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I would go there
I'm
as
giving
well.
it a further twist than just something that happens. It's
Yeah.
not something that happens, it's what's going on in what happens.
Right, but that in itself is a happening.
Well, it's a possibility for happening.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
You're hoping it happens. It's what you're dreaming of or what you're trying to recall. But
Right.
what you're dreaming.
Okay.
There was a line in Montesquieu, I think it was, there that was common. It says, oh my friends, there are no friends," meaning not yet. You know, friendship is what we want, what we love, what we want to become, but we're not friends yet. We haven't. It's sort of shining a white light on the thing to expose its imperfections. We're always dreaming of. There's always something we're dreaming of.
Kind of like a journey.
It's like it is a journey. That's right.
Yeah.
I mean,
A journey.
the question you could then raise, by the way, is this: you say, well, if the to come of democracy or of anything else, but let's stick with democracy, is so absolute, so futural, so much a matter of expectation and unforeseeable, how do you know it will be democracy? And the answer is we won't. The answer is the to come. And if you use the expression the democracy to come, the to come is more important than the democracy. The event is this deep structure of expectation, which
Yeah,
at the moment we're expressing with this word democracy. But the word democracy is just one more historical construction. If it's constructed, it can be deconstructed. What you can't deconstruct is the hope, expectation, the futuricity.
The abstraction.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, it's not an abstraction, but we better go into it. Let's get another question in there.
Okay.
Yes. Edward asked if isn't personification the same thing as projection? Edward,
That would be a version of it, yeah. I mean, yeah, we project, but one of the ways in which we project is to personify. Yes, and I'm saying we do that, and that's okay. You know, you talk to your trees, you talk to your dog, you talk to the old hat of your old dead uncle, and when you do that, something very serious is happening. Some of the most serious things we do in life are personifications, or enacted in personifications, and the event is what is serious. If you literalize the spirit, you kill it. If you literalize the personification, you kill it. You turn it into a myth.
So again,
But if you go with it, if you suspend your disbelief, you got it.
Interesting.
And when you share a personification with another person, that's social construction, right? We're creating the dog.
That's right. And really powerful personifications need to be communally constructed, because they're not just personal constructions, they're communally constructed. So gods like that. I mean, the God we all grew up with was communally constructed. It wasn't just my godparents that did it. It wasn't just Sister Rosa Mystica. It was the ages constructed that personification.
Right. Just in the same way, God socially constructs us if we believe that God is multiple in personalities and personas. So God is a social being in the Trinity.
Oh, I see.
Creating and recreating us and bringing us into existence all the time.
I see. Yeah, I know. Yes.
Well,
Yeah,
and
I mean, other forms of life, they won't do that. That's completely far into a Jewish way of thinking about it. But yes, for us, that works.
Right.
That something gets itself done. In Greek, you've got three moods. You got active, passive, and middle. Three voices: active, passive, and middle. Everything I'm talking about takes place in the middle voice. It's not an action that somebody does. The event is not an act which somebody does. It's not a passivity which somebody suffers. It's something getting itself done in the middle voice. So something's getting itself done in the Trinity. Philosophically, by the way, it showed up in German idealism, in Kant and Hegel and Marx and all that. I think they're the great Trinitarian philosophers. I do. The original Trinitarians were Neoplatonists, and they had a really big problem about how they're going to square the one beyond all plurality with the Trinity. Meister Eckhart spent his life trying to straighten that one out, and he got condemned for it. But they said, you didn't straighten it out. You're a heretic.
right. Oh, God, rid me of God. Right.
That's it. That's it. That's right.
Right.
Okay.
And then Heidegger represents Meister Eckhart, as you say in your book, in a different way.
One of the reasons I resonate with Heidegger is I sort of have a path like his. He started out as studying medieval Catholicism, Catholic philosophy, and moved into phenomenology and hermeneutics. He sort of created phenomenology and hermeneutics. And I sort of tried to do that myself. Jeff, next question.
Well, we're actually getting close to time here, I think.
Oh, okay. Well,
What do you think, Jeff?
I think that you probably are at time. There are so many things. We just skimmed across the surface of the pond.
I bet. And I feel like I've been, like a mosquito on the surface of the water myself. So I want to make just a couple of closing remarks, and then I'm going to have Jack have the last word. One of the many things I've learned from Jack, and I think, Jack, you get this a bit from Derrida in your book, The Prayers and Tears of Derrida, okay, that we associate seeing with knowledge, okay? And Marcus used that image all the time as seeing and, getting new lenses and, learning more and so forth. So making the equation between seeing and knowledge. You make this wonderful comment that the eye is actually meant for tears and weeping, because we will never know all there is to know. We will never see all there is to see. And maybe that's part of what provokes our tears. But in acknowledging that might be our true sight. You suggest that we're all blind, as I mentioned earlier today, and I think you described our blindness as a structure of non-knowing, if I've got that right. And that we, to sort of take the posture that we can't know it all, we won't know it all, but that does not in any way take away from our hope. In fact, if I understand you right, hope is not knowing what's coming, but hoping nonetheless. And I think that's where the impossible is what motivates the hope for maybe, perhaps, what could be possible. Okay. So, I mean, I find your work very hopeful and challenges us to stay, to use a very modern word these days, or postmodern day word, fluid, but to stay really fluid and responsive to this. And if I've got this right, Jack, you suggest that such blindness, okay, or the tears that are made, the eyes that are made for weeping and tears, that blindness is an event, that blindness even is an event. And I know that's a provocative way to kind of end our time. And I'm looking forward to being able to pick that up again. But in honor, Jack, of you and Jacques Derrida, at the close of our session, we show a bunch of closing slides. And the music that I'm going to play for that, I want everyone to know, is the Lacrimosa from Mozart's Requiem. And Lacrimosa is the Latin for weeping or tears. Okay. Interestingly enough, that piece was never completed. I think that's just an interesting thing to comment on. And the Latin, the words speak to "O sorrowful day, when rising from the ashes, we pray, God have mercy, compassionate Lord Jesus, grant us peace." So as I hear the Lacrimosa, it's a prayer to a God of tears and compassion. And I just find all of that the eyes perhaps are more made for tears than they are for non-knowing. Anyway, I've been caught by that, and I will want to return to conversation with you about that. But I want to thank you, Jack, for your work, your life work, and let me just thank the stirring that forever keeps you restless. That's a testimony in itself. I mean, in a sense, you're a witness to the very thing we're trying to talk about in your own restlessness. And I see you as a man of prayer, of tears, and compassion. So thank you for bringing me into a deeper sense and a lighter sense of existential trust in my own journey that I know will accompany me the whole way. So thank you for being with us. And I want you now to have the last word, last comment, and then I'd love it if you would send us off with a benediction or a blessing. And then Jack will join us for coffee hour, by the way. So.
Well, thank you very much. I should say that everything you just said about blindness and tears was me being a scribe, reporting what Derrida says. So that is me passing that on. But what's interesting, the other thing that's pretty interesting about that was Derrida commenting on Augustine. That was Derrida rewriting the Augustine in postmodern, rewriting the Confessions in the postmodern style, which is one of the things, that's a very good example of what deconstruction is. Deconstruction is not, Nietzsche spoke about cross-fuzzing with a hammer, so you come in there and whack it and break up all the idols of the past. Deconstruction is not like that. Deconstruction is a subtilitas. So what Derrida does is inhabit the Confessions and rewrite it from the point of view of an atheist. He's an atheist. He is officially, if he still had to answer the census form, he would have to say, I'm an atheist. But he's one of the most religious people I've ever met. He's deeply, deeply Augustinian, Jewish Augustinian atheist, is Derrida. And that's him commenting on Augustine, calling himself the Filius Istarum Lacrimarum, the son of these tears, which was a reference to Monica, who was weeping over Augustine before his conversion, afraid he was going to go to hell because he was running around with all these women. And Derrida had his own experience. Derrida grew up in Algeria, which is ancient Numidia, which is where Augustine lives. And his mother was worried about him when he went off to Paris to study philosophy, and she was afraid that he was going to become an atheist, which he did. But he became an Augustinian atheist, which is different. That's deconstruction. The deconstruction re-inhabits something, reinvents it, retells it, because that's why. Because it's the damn event. It's not the formal, crystallized formulation. It's the event that's going on, the event that can be repeated. All right, so that was just postscript to what you just said. The read Jack Derrida for that, if you want to know more about it. So the last thing you asked me to do, which is very intimidating. This is the most intimidating thing of all. I mean, I've been working on this for a while right now, this benediction. So one of the reasons it was justifying personification is that when you pray, you personify. So I'm going to personify here, right? Now, David, the pew, will appreciate this because I'm going to start in the classic style of Jean-Baptiste de La Salle, who taught us all to start class in the morning and then every hour on the hour, repeat. Let us remember that we are in the holy presence of God. All right. Now, I am going to reinvent that sentiment, which is always with me. Let us remember that we are in the holy presence of God. Let us remember that we are in the presencing of God, of the coming to presence of God. Let us remember that we are in the presence of God, but that God is not a presence, but a coming, which disturbs the peace of the present, which pries the present open to what is coming. We pray you, come. May your time come in an instant, in the twinkling of the eye. We long for you to come, yearn for you, like deer for running streams. When will you come? Give us this time, we pray you, the time of your coming and welcoming, the time of giving and forgiving, the time to come, of justice to come. May justice come and wash over us like water over the land. We pray you, come. We who? Who are we? We are the ones who do not know who we are. We are the nameless ones, made restless by the trembling of an indiscernible event, praying, weeping, sighing, dreaming of your coming, sending up our prayers like wounded words, praying for the truth of the event, for the courage of the truth, for the courage to welcome the event, praying not to get lost, not get any more lost than we already are, praying that our prayers to heaven go, to somewhere go. We are turned to you, adieu, to God, by God, as to a distant rumbling of something coming, of what we do not know. We are shaken by the trauma of the name of God, which is the name of the promise to make all things new. We are the ones who have become a question to ourselves. We are restless hearts quivering under a silent and obscure call. We are the blind praying in the dark, de profundis, praying to be able to pray, hanging on by a prayer, praying to know how to pray, which is already a prayer, prayer's first prayer. Is it God who calls? Who knows who is called? God only knows. When will you come? Believe us, you are in our memory. We promise that we will recall all that you have been, yes, and keep you in our heart, yes, every day, every hour. Forgive us for all that we have forgotten in silence as we forgive others. When will you come? Lord, when did we see you hungry and give you to eat? Is that you, Lord? The truth of the event is not a name, but a deed. Go in peace. Shalom. Come. Yes, yes. Adieu. Amen.
Thank you, Jack. Would you be willing to make that prayer available to us?
Well, I stole it from my own book, actually. It's sort of a rewrite for the occasion from the very end of The Weakness of God. If you look at the concluding prayer, yep. I sort of excerpted, so I plagiarized myself. I don't know if you can do that, but it's a kind of rewrite for the occasion. I went back to it and picked up on the things you said you were going to do with the Psalms and with blindness, and reworked it in the light of what you were saying at the beginning. So now you're going to have a coffee time?
Yes, we are. Thank you. And we will, for those who can stay for a coffee time, in about, the Lacrimosa runs about 3 minutes. And so in a little more, in about 3 minutes, we will then reconvene for coffee time. And Jack, thank you so much for being with us today. What a gift.
So we've got, you're quite welcome. So we got 3 minutes?
Yes, you've got 3 minutes. We'll see you in a few minutes. You can turn your video off if you want to, and then we can turn it back on again in about 3 minutes.
Very good.
Okay. See you next time. See you June 12th.